It's time to talk music, audio gear, and anything else that crosses our minds. I'm Mark.
And I'm Peter.
And welcome to the Hurton Audio Podcast. Some Walk the Moon has released like a swan song of sorts called The Liftaway, which features sort of new music that's sort of not come out, and then sort of remixes and tracks from their debut album, I Want, that is not on Spotify and streaming services. Which is a pretty cool thing for a band that, say, is going on hiatus to release like just something for fans of the band to sort of listen to and get into, which is nice.
And they've stressed that they're not going away forever. It's like a goodbye for now. But like you say, Mike, there's a lot of bands that are just like, yeah, we're calling it all a bit like Daft Punk. It's like, oh no, yeah, we called it ages ago. And
yeah, 10 years ago. Yeah, and then you're not getting anything else, which I think a lot of Daft Punk fans were gutted about because they'd been waiting in suspense for 10 years after Random Access Memories, only to be brought to tears by Daft Punk's announcement video of them basically exploding, which is taken from one of the movies that they've done anyway.
Yeah, but what's nice with Walk the Moon, like you say, is that they're saying, look, it may, for people who have been massive fans, and we've certainly been very big on Walk the Moon from just after Talking Is Hard and What If Nothing mainly was the album that really got us super into Walk the Moon. So a bit latecomers to Walk the Moon as a band, but still thoroughly enjoyed and have been to see them and stuff. So when they say, oh, we're going on hiatus or an indefinite hiatus, indefinite's always a horrible word for that, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's never as indefinite as they're willing to say it is on the press release.
Yeah. So, but, you know, they're like, you're all, you know, a bit gutted. So here's like, how many songs is on it, Mark? Is it like 9 tracks?
I believe it's 3 new songs in quotation marks in a row. Then, because there could be demos or whatever taken from whatever they've done. 3 songs from I Want, and then 2 remixes, and then a new song with the band.
No, I believe that's from Anna Sun.
Oh,
the
is
last
it?
track. We just flicked through on Spotify real quick, and I'm sure I saw it on Anna Sun.
Let me just have a look.
So it's a really nice package, to say, wow, well, we're going somewhere for a bit, or we may not release any music in a while, but here's 9 new things to listen to, which is, I think, a very underrated technique. And to their unfortunate, decision, everybody in the Instagram comment section on the announcement is like, you're missing all these tracks, put all these tracks out. So whether they feel they have to actually follow up with some of the additional songs from, I believe the songs are from like a demo. Is it a demo album? I Want.
So Iscariot is a song of Anna Sun, but they've now done a new version with bare hands.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought had happened when I just glanced by it.
So, yeah, it's a pretty cool release, really. And you sort of get a little bit of everything. I suppose you get a little bit of the initial debut of Walk the Moon, and then some sort of songs as almost like a finale before the encore, I suppose, is what you sort of thinking. Like the encore's in, I don't know, 5-6 years time, 10 years time or whatever, but this is like the send off. So you've got, as a Walk the Moon fan, if they don't come back, this is like the send off.
Yeah, it's like a nice send off, like you were saying, like a swan song sort of situation.
It would have been nice to have songs like Win Anyway on this, specifically in a physical release territory. Like on streaming, I understand that there's not really much point of just packing like another 5 songs on the end, but obviously there's tracks that have come out, like Walk the Moon have got a lot of singles and like 3 song sort of bits here and there that haven't actually made it onto any physical release. So if they did press the Liftaway, it would be nice to see a few of those songs sort of included, with this being a relatively short release.
Interestingly enough, this says on Spotify, if anybody is that way inclined like I am to see what is the credited record label, it does say RCA Sony. So that has some implications for me. I didn't know whether this would be an independent, I don't know how their contract is, how many albums they're signed for. I was curious if it was going to be an independent release or not from Walk the Moon. So the fact that it's on RCA means that potentially if RCA, Sony want to make some money and they see that there is demand, they may go through and get some of the vault tracks out, or this may be a band and label way of saying, let's put something out for the fans, you know, maybe make a bit of money. But, you know, I would rather them do that. Like the songs, like on the 3 songs from I Want have been sat there, not really monetized in terms of streaming services. So I would encourage them, just, put them out. If they've got these songs, put them out. Why not?
I think the very tough thing, like we've talked about when it comes to like, when a band breaks up, what happens to all the demos and songs? And you're sort of seeing this happen with bands like, say, Daft Punk, where they don't have anything. And
which is still unbelievable to me.
The label's panicking and they're going drumless edition. We need something to release, something to commemorate like a 10th anniversary or whatever with. It's interesting, but like you say, in an ideal world, it doesn't really disappoint or hamper anybody to have tracks that have been recorded and brought up to sort of mix master level to not come out, because it doesn't benefit the band financially. And a lot of the time, fans are clambering for any scraps, like with Queen. Before they actually put songs like with Dog with a Bone and stuff out, there was YouTube sort of rips that was awful that people were clambering to listen to.
I did an A/B of the audio quality of the demo version that I had found on YouTube of Dog with a Bone to the version that came out on the Miracle Deluxe Expanded 40th Anniversary Edition. And the audio quality, and there's actually some performance differences as well, which is a surprise to me. But the audio quality is unbelievably bad on the version that I had listened to. And because I'd found it when I was a lot younger and I wasn't really production mindset, you know, in that headspace, I just thought, oh, wow, great, I get to hear Queen do something I haven't heard before. But then comparing it, oh my God, it sounded like garbage. Like the transfer was bad and the export was bad, and it was not, you know, it's obviously a rough mix, so there's all that noise and hiss, and it's just not refined at all. So especially like when they've got these digital sessions, or even when they've got tapes they can go back to, they can easily bring these like old recordings to like professional grade, because the technology is there. I mean, like we said last week, look at the Beatles. It can be done. So it's just a case of, do you want to or not? And I mean, we're talking about songs that were originally released, like by Walk the Moon. So they're not really going to have to do anything. I mean, I believe the 3 in the middle are the original recordings, aren't they?
Yeah. But like Mono Noah, he's saying Owawe, so or pronouncing it in Japanese, because it's a Japanese proverb, isn't it? So I'm not going to try and say it, but the
Mono no Owawe, we're thinking, if I didn't get that
as I read it
wrong.
In English, it just looks like Mono no Aware, but listening to the song, obviously it's pronounced slightly differently.
Which makes sense if you think about the phonetics of the language.
I was just about to say that song's very good, and it has a really nice little synthesizer solo, which I really enjoyed there.
Very Walk the Moon. Do you think it is an SH 201?
Maybe. There's a chance. We know that they like that synth, so there is a chance. But yeah, it's a really nice thing for a band to do. I suppose the thing is, like when we're talking about fans of bands, and in most scenarios, you just want as much as possible. Like, I know a lot of artists are like, we need to save it, we need it to be the best that we have available.
And they always say, leave them wanting more, not leave them wanting less. But sometimes you get to a point where you're a fan of a band and you're like, give me anything.
Give me everything, isn't it? Give me literally everything that you've got. And you sort of seen that with the Walk the Moon comments. I mean, they've done a really good send-off as Walk the Moon, because they've done this big sort of Instagram campaign sort of documenting each era of the band leading up to this announcement as well, where Nicholas Petrolta's been talking about all the different eras. And you sort of thought, oh, well, they're just recapping it. And then that was leading up to this announcement of the Liftaway, which is a really nice thing, because like you say, you sort of come to terms through all these announcements on Instagram and stuff that, oh yeah, there's not going to be any more music coming out. And then it's like, but wait, there is some more music coming out, which I think is a really cool thing to do.
You know, we should have maybe seen it coming with the way that there was like breaking down their announcement of the hiatus, but I was still very surprised when they announced new music.
And also when it was like, oh, it's coming out like in 2 weeks' time, not it's coming out. I mean, I was ready for like a next year release or something like that. So it's really nice to get something like
the only thing
sooner.
with that is if there was like, we're going on hiatus, but end of 2024 we're gonna have a new studio album out, you'd be like, how are you going on hiatus? It's one of those things. But I do think it would be interesting to see whether they choose to do a physical release of this, and then if they do a physical release, maybe they might just take on board the comments and put the I want with the bonus Liftaway songs on the end. That could that could be a scenario, because it is a full album, isn't it? I want. And I know songs ended up on Anna's Son, I believe.
Yeah.
So it's not like a purely new album, but it's one of those, as we often see, like a pre-debut album, and almost, I mean, a good chunk of people have these where there's the debut album, but then there's the album before the debut album where there was getting it all together, or maybe that there wasn't signed in official capacity yet.
I suppose debut albums almost getting into that sort of like idol culture in Japan, where the debut is like their official like commercial release, more so than the first thing they've made. But I think in the West, you typically associate debut with the first one, like just the first thing they've made.
It depends on the scale of the band, because some of the bands, their debut is the very first thing they put out. And then for other bands, you know, a bit like Imagine Dragons, the debut is like realistically like the fourth multi-song project or fifth multi-song project, because they've been making EPs, or say like the 1975, they have like 4 or 5 EPs.
And then the best few songs that go on the album with some new songs.
Yeah.
But it also has that, it's like a pre-release strategy where, like you say, debut album it is sort of an odd term. And, you know, you see advertisements for debut albums, and BB Doobie's a great one. They were saying Fake It Flowers was a debut album, was Dirty Hit, and I was looking at Dirty Hit store like, well, there's another 4 BB Doobie albums here.
Yeah.
And it's a tough one. You know, I think it's a very hot word that they like to use.
But have you noticed that they hate to use the term sophomore album for the second album, which is, I think, a term that most people who aren't American don't even realise exists. And I don't even know what you call your third album.
It's just trilogy, innit? Trilogy, third album. I suppose they just call it third album, but it's often more than one word when they describe a third album. But that puts Walk the Moon at roughly 5, doesn't it? I know, because the thing is with Walk the Moon, I want is sort of like it's like 50%
0.5.
0.5 sort of album. So it does put them at sort of a nice catalogue, particularly when, you know, I didn't know if there was going to continue. Like, I was surprised when we got Heights, and Heights is a really good album to listen to.
Fantastic album.
There's a fair few. I mean, all the singles. Like, I mean, Giants is probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite.
Giants is unbelievably good in terms of the production and the hype. It's a very hype sort of song, but as it gets near the end, there's some really, really, really fantastic, like, spreading of the wings. Like, Walk the Moon operate in like a pop rock genre most of the time.
Someone Else's Game is just a particularly good B-side, well, like a album track, basically.
Yeah, a deep cut, if you will.
Just a really solid rock track for me. And Walk the Moon operate in like a sort of, they're pop rock, but they definitely lean more towards rock, contemporary rock.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, when these bands get marketed to them, they look at Walk the Moon as like an 80s rehash band because of Shut Up and Dance.
Yeah.
And then they don't hear these other songs.
I mean, I remember listening to What If Nothing, and I can't remember what actually got me to listen to it. I listened to it just after it had come out. But I think I was probably looking for some new music, probably looking for new bands. And I remember really, really liking Shut Up and Dance, because I think particularly on UK radio, Shut Up and Dance was a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, it was.
When it came out, it was in an EDM-centric field where almost no guitar music, it felt like, maybe with the exception of some indie tracks, were really being played on commercial radio. So Shut Up and Dance with its like sort of pomp 80s thing. And another thing with Walk the Moon, they put the guitars up in the mix, which is
have solos.
Really nice.
They actually have solos on multiple, well, quite frequently. I mean, like Headphones has a great outro as well.
Headphones is fantastic on What If Nothing.
and they have a lot of range for a pop, like in quotations, pop rock band. That's the way they're marketed towards you.
It sounds ridiculous when you're looking at it says that they've got 10 million monthly listeners. I mean, that's slightly skewed because of Shut Up and Dance, but again, they are like commercially a relatively, I would say, a very successful band. But I suppose depending on where you live, it will dictate on how big they feel, because Shut Up and Dance is like I think a global smash, but then other singles may not have got deep into like commercial radio in your location. So I imagine in America they feel a lot bigger than they do in the UK. But my point is, even though they've got 10 million monthly listeners, I still would say Walk the Moon are immensely underrated as a band. Like, people just don't. I think that if like people who really are into that rock thing listened to Walk the Moon and actually took them seriously, they would have a lot more like acclaim, because I think it's one of those where I would hate to think of Walk the Moon getting brushed off as a one-hit wonder band.
Yeah, I agree with that, because the thing is that they had, I mean, like you say, Anna Sung was a hit before Shut Up and Dance anyway. Obviously, we didn't hear of it. Us two didn't hear of it, but anybody who was a fan of Walk the Moon will have known that,
they
Shut
had
Up
songs
and Dance.
bubbling up and sync deals and stuff before Shut Up and Dance, yes.
And then, they've released a real good string of singles from all the albums as well, and got plenty of videos. You would assume that. I mean, I remember, as you say, they're not on the albums, are they? What's the song I'm thinking of? One of the singles that
One
came.
Foot?
No.
Because 1 Foot, I remember, I think 1 Foot, I saw it on YouTube.
1 Foot, didn't we?
I heard it somewhere, and that's what made me go, whoa, I didn't realise Walk the Moon, I'd not really paid attention after Shut Up and Dance. And then when I was like, oh, they're back, they're doing something, I give that album a lot of time of day. And luckily, I remember we got into What If Nothing, and it was like 2 months later or 3 months later, they was on tour in the UK, and I remember saying, I know I've only really just started listening to this, but I feel like I should buy tickets to see them, because this album's like unbelievably good. I remember it being like quite mind-blowing at the time for the mix of production and guitar-focused music. Like, because a lot of the time you'll hear bands do like a very produced album, but in that production and that over attention to production, the guitars tend to get pushed way back because they tend to take up too much space in the mix, or they don't suit the songs because they're using a lot of electronic elements and it sounds weird. Walk the Moon's What If Nothing was not the case. Like, you have songs like Headphones that are just, the guitars are just in your face as much as any like record you could think of.
Lots of techie drumming, just a full techie, sort of like
the performances are just great performances across the album.
Yeah, like I say, underrated musicians as well. Like,
100%.
Like, they are very good musicians, and I do think that, like I say, a lot of bands, and it's not just Walk the Moon, it's a lot of bands, because it's that new band thing that a lot of people who say listen to classic rock will go, oh, well, I don't like anything that come out after the year 2000, or in some cases after the 1990s. But there's lots of these bands that you'll like if you hear them. The trick is actually listening.
Going out and making the effort to just say, I'm just going to check this album out on Spotify. Whether I think I'll like it or not, I'm just going to listen through it.
Headphones has like the energy, the raw energy that, say, Cochise by... is it Cochise that has the fireworks?
Cochise by Audioslave.
Yeah, by Audioslave. I was thinking if Cochise had the firework one, that's the one I was thinking of. It has that type of raw energy, but then it has that sort of production that really puts it one step above where it could be. It could just be a raw jam, but because you've got all this like atmospheres and effects and like mix and songwriting sort of hooks that they've put in, it just hits really, really hard. And this is the thing with a lot of sort of like when you go listen to heavier bands in quotation marks that came out in the past, they don't have the luxury of some of these production tricks that make the songs hit harder. And when you have impacts and sort of white noise sweeps and these tools that really make like a breakdown hit, it really comes across well. But you've just got a lot of like cool studio effects, and it was Time Bomb that I was thinking of. That was the single.
Oh yes, yeah. And also, a lot of re-triggering of vocals, resampling of vocals. Really interesting to hear in rock arrangements, because I still think, people do it and it's becoming more popular, and there's bands that take it to like, a more direct place, like Bring Me the Horizon and bands like that come to mind. Probably Enter Shikari, although I'm not super familiar with their material. People who push the boundaries of the genre they're in. But, Walk the Moon do it with such finesse, and I don't feel like anything ever sounds out of place on a Walk the Moon record. Like they'll put all this weird creative stuff in and really play about your expectations, but it will still sound grounded, like it's supposed to be there.
It has more of the effect of like when Peter Gabriel is messing around in the 80s with studio effects and arrangements. It has that sort of thing where it feels like a little bit more subtle, but also a little bit more like it's placed within the song and it's not like jumping out and it shouldn't be there. It feels more like a studio effect than say like a really out of the ordinary retrig sort of thing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And also, one thing that comes to mind with Walk the Moon, like particularly in the current climate where most singles are like 2 minutes 50, if that, they're such a good band to listen to if you like to hear the band like jam, because they've actually on a lot of their songs, like Fire in Your House comes to mind.
Oh,
like
great track.
There's like these extended jam sections, and they could have easily cut them out and said, well, we're operating in like this sort of pop rock space, but they've chosen not to, and they've left these ace like jams in.
Or even Giants just taking like 10 seconds to come in. Like the song just fades in with this sort of pad, sort of like introduction to the song. And it's just really nice because in streaming culture, you sort of don't get a second, whereas it's nice when they let a song breathe at the outro for like a minute. They just jam around, because it's sort of like luxuries that you don't seem to have with a lot of songwriting, because it's like quick, concise, deliver the song, next
get
song.
out. Deliver the song, get out of the song. That's like the modern way of doing things, I feel like.
Whereas you feel like a song like Fire in Your House is almost like a recording that's live, but then done to a level of a studio production.
And I don't get why these techniques aren't more popular on studio records, because people go out live and they do these 2-minute pop songs, and that's fine. And then live, they're like, well, we've got to put like a 50-second guitar solo in and put these fills and all this energy
out
in.
To do a chant with the crowd either after or the middle or the start of the song. And drag one thing out, like Boys Like Girls did it.
Yeah.
They dragged language out for about 4 minutes in the middle.
Yeah. And people love it live. And I know live and studio, two different wheelhouses, right? But there's a reason why people go crazy when the song breaks out into a guitar solo at a, peak of the arrangement, maybe just after the bridge or something, last chorus. And it's because it works. And it traditionally has always worked. So it's really annoying. Like Gorilla, Bruno Mars.
Oh, yeah.
On the MTV, was it the MTV Awards?
Yeah, they did a really cool, like, Purple Rainy sort of thing.
And he's shredding. I'm like, I didn't even know Bruno Mars could play a guitar. This is what, like 2013 or something?
Yeah.
Like this happened. And then we went to listen to the studio record. We was like, whoa, because, I had not quite got warmed up to Bruno Mars, because I remember loving everything he did after that. But that was where I was still like, is he just a pop thing or whatever? But I remember thinking, God, he's really talented. Like, you can tell in the performances.
And you go listen to the original studio version of Gorilla, and it's like, it'd be harsh to say it sounds flat, but in comparison to that,
expecting that, it's like they made it a great pop record, and that's fine. But we wanted the Purple Rain solo and the vibes.
Yeah, the vibes. And it seemed to not have the vibes that it had. That particular live performance of it was just... It was like it knocked your socks off, and then you went to listen to the record, and you was like, "Oh, that's not
They'd sort
what
of
it is."
Done that thing where they produced a song great, but they suck some of that initial raw emotion out of it, and it's hard to describe because sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. But other artists, like some artists like Bruno Mars, is really, really good at bringing that energy, and then they're in situations where nobody wants to hear it on the record. And you're like, but he's so good at it.
And you can tell, like, on the records after Unorthodox Jukebox, that he was enabled to do more the sound that he wanted to do. Because it's a lot more personality. And, like, the Silk Sonic stuff and all that just oozing personality. And I think there was restricting, from what I can tell as a listener, his first album or so, there was sort of restricting him creatively to say, you can't do this, you have to operate in this.
Felt like it.
And then from when he was big enough to say, well, I want to do what I want to do, all of the tracks, all of the albums he's put out have been absolutely full of vibes and full of different era sort of flavors. Like, and that's the thing. It's like, I feel like a lot of the time major label artists get put in a box and they say, you're not allowed to experiment. You're not allowed to do what you actually want to do. You have to like phone it into where we are, you know, which maybe is less common now. But I think the problem with the 2010s is that it had a very like cold digital sound and everything was like massive patches and stuff.
Yeah.
And that affected a lot of the artists that come out in that sort of mindset, because the labels clearly were saying, we want it to sound cutting edge, we don't want it to sound like a throwback. Whereas throwback is in right now.
Throwback can be more in.
Everything seems to be a throwback to a different era. It's
even like the modern EDM trance is just not a rehash, but it's definitely a really specific throwback to early 2000s, late 90s music. I mean, you think, you know, like the Logical song, Kim Petras and David Guetta's just put that out.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I know they're doing Scooter, yeah, but Scooter sampled Supertramp. And I hope to God Supertramp didn't cover that song. Otherwise, you go in so many layers back. You know, it turns into essentially like
Chinese whispers.
Well, Chinese whispers, or like spoken word, you know, like word of mouth storytelling. Where they're passing the song down to generations, you know, which I don't condemn, but it's one of those sometimes where you think, how many times do you have to like redo a chorus essentially? It's I mean, there's always going to be songs like that.
And there's the argument is that taking a hook from another song to bolster your own song cheap as a technique or not? Which I think a lot of people, like music reviews and stuff, it's like, is it a cool throwback or is it like a cheap way to go, well, I already like this hook?
You see, I think in terms of, say, David Guetta doing it, obviously he gets, you know, music charts, blah, 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 and all that. But the reason why he does it will be for his live shows, DJ sets. Yeah. And he'll be like, I really want to cut into Logical, but I want to have an edit that's different from the original, from the Scooter version.
And like we say, if you're going to make that edit, just put it out. Because this is the mistake, once again, coming back to Daft Punk. Daft Punk made when Eric Prydz said, well, if they're not going to do Call on Me, I will do Call on Me. And obviously there's a bunch of songs
to go into this rumour, and it is a rumour, I don't know how true this is. Allegedly, Daft Punk had made a bunch of edits when they was doing DJ sets that they had specifically said, we're not going to release these because we want them to be special to these club nights or live sets we're doing. And basically they included songs like Call on Me, and I'm assuming a lot of others of these French house-inspired tracks that came out. So there's an insinuation that because they're sampling Stevie Winwood on that song, well, they don't own that. So theoretically, even if Eric Prydz, and this is all theoretical, I don't know if this is factually accurate, if Eric Prydz went to one of these Daft Punk nights, heard Call on Me, knew that Daft Punk were having no intention of releasing it, it would be pretty easy to go back to his studio, sample the same song, get the chords in how he remembers it.
Even if it's slightly different.
Slightly different. All you have to do is follow the chords of the song, because that's sort of what they do, really, of Valerie by Stevie Winwood. And then, I didn't even know this till doing more research into it. Stevie Winwood actually came back to re-sing that song for Eric Prydz. So there's no connection there to Daft Punk at all. But theoretically, Daft Punk put two and two together first. Whether anybody,
to what extent and whether it sounded anything like the studio version, and obviously it's a rumour. But
the accuracy of that story is greatly variable. So, you know, do your own research. But that's the theory. And speaking of remixes, how refreshing is it to have a band like Walk the Moon also embrace remixes? Because there's a lot of bands like the 1975 where I'm like, I feel like they should have remixes out, and they don't. And you know,
they remix other people as well in the 1975.
Yeah, very occasionally.
But they don't really remix themselves either. So not only do they not have many other people come in to remix them, but they also don't remix themselves practically at all.
Yeah, because I remember really liking the 1 Foot remixes when they came out, and obviously there's some good Show Up and Dance ones.
The
and
Captain
stuff too.
Cuts remix is really good.
So and it's nice
Lost
to get
Kings remix of Different Colours is quite good as well. I remember that one.
So it's nice to get some more remixes as well on this new release, and hopefully Walk the Moon aren't gone too long. I want them to do for whatever reason they are going on hiatus. Let them do that. Fingers crossed. If they feel like it and they have a nice break, they might come back stronger. They have alluded to the fact that they're, intended on coming back, which is nice, because sometimes it's a bit annoying when they're like, yeah, we're calling a break. We hate each other's guts. We're never going to see each other again. And then 2 years later, right, we're reforming.
We've ran out of money. As so many 80s rock bands have done.
Yeah. And I think, when you use the 80s rock bands like Motley Crue as a
Guns N'
benchmark,
Roses.
you can say, well, Walk the Moon, they could theoretically have 10 years out.
15.
Even like Boys Like Girls, they could have 10 years out and still come back and make a unbelievable album with more experience. I mean, we don't even know, is one of them going solo? It's like Nicholas Petrolta. I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. I hope I'm somewhere near. Is he going to go solo? Or is Eli going to go solo? Questions.
You don't know, do you? Because Churches have done this similar thing where they've all three of them have done solo projects, and Lauren Mayberry's released an album, and one of the other two, I always confuse which projects they're working on, and I can't even remember the name of the project I saw one of them working on, because it was very it's just a word, and it didn't stick in my memory.
Are they doing? I'm right in thinking they're doing IDM.
Yeah, they're doing
stuff.
IDM sort of stuff, and then she's just doing. I think they said she plans on doing 2 solo albums before Churches reform. But once again, a similar situation to Walk the Moon, that they are planning to reform.
If you use The Killers as a benchmark for Brandon Flowers doing 2 solo albums, they only really were out of the game for about 5 years. Yeah. So if you use that as a benchmark, there's a potential that you could see Churches and Walk the Moon reforming end half of this decade.
And also, a lot of the bands will typically have 2 to 4 years, a lot of artists in general, have 2 to 4 years gap between some of their albums anyway. So I think we've got into a I want it now sort of situation, as fans of music, where you're being drip fed content every week on Spotify and you're like, I want something now. And it's well, wait for 4 years. But in the 2000s, it was if you was a fan of a lot of the bands, it was well, you have to wait 4 to 5 years. Yeah. Even for bands like Muse,
for any release at all.
Any release.
Yeah.
And it was just radio silence. So I think it's obviously now they can announce things with a little bit more nuance via social media. But before, bands would just be oh, we're just chilling out. We've got families or whatever, and we'll be back at some point. And as a fan of the band, you just waited until they announced something. And that announcement could be 5 years away before new music comes out. I mean, it's like Chinese Democracy with Guns N' Roses.
Oh my God, yeah.
The album that's never come out.
I was going to say, where's the new album? It's never...
But they're not on hiatus, but they might as well be, as far as not live, but as far as studio. And they've released a few singles, but it's one of those things. So a band like Walk the Moon can announce a hiatus and come back before some bands have even got their act together to go back in the studio. So it's one of those things. But obviously an announcement you take as well, it's going to be at least 2 or 3, 4 or 5 years.
So we would like to wish Walk the Moon a great hiatus. I have been a massive fan of Walk the Moon. I hope we get more music sooner rather than later, but let them do the thing and hopefully come back stronger.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. Let us know what you think in the polls, and see you next week, everyone.
See you next week. Thanks for listening.